Hello and welcome to How to Merge AppSec and DevOps Effectively for the Good of Software, presented by ZeroNorth. They are a provider of a application security automation and orchestration platform. I'm your host today, Mike Vizard. Our speakers are Dan Beauregard, who's a DevOps evangelist for ZeroNorth, and Patrick Hayes, who is an AppSec solutions architect. Gentlemen, welcome to the broadcast today. We are going to have 4 $25 gift card certificates to give away at the end to some lucky winners, and we're encouraging everybody to ask questions during the Q&A by finding that little button on the side there that says here, click here, and you can ask any question you like of our experts today. With that, our first kickoff on the sections are going to be 4 sections today. First one is about impact digital transformations are having on AppSec, and I'm going to kick it over to Dan. Gentlemen, take it away.
All right, thanks a lot, Mike. Really appreciate it, and hope everybody is having a great day today. So let's get things started. A little bit of background in the space to really bring us into our discussion. So historically, application security has not received the same level of interest and investment as other categories of security have, like network, endpoint, identity. This has to change. I mean, we can look at recent events like the SolarWinds breach of late that is bringing awareness to that space, which is great. But the fact is, the global economy is now driven by software. Our infrastructure, healthcare, financial services, defense systems, many markets are software enabled and software controlled. Even more traditional companies have to transform themselves into a software company. It is key to their growth, key to the competitive advantage, and in some cases, key for their survival. Given that, we need to do something about the vulnerabilities in our applications. Our apps remain extremely vulnerable, with software now being one of the major sources of cyber attacks. This can happen, especially with our collective reliance on software. Just like the safety of air travel, the security of software is not optional. Now, with environments like cloud native, serverless, containers, microservices, and more, software development ecosystems are becoming increasingly more multi-layered and diverse. As a result, the threat landscape just keeps evolving, which now leads us to DevOps. DevOps is absolutely helping drive digital transformations in most organizations. The pace of development is not slowing down, so if the way the security is delivered doesn't adapt, we will all be continuously exposed to malicious actors. It's no longer sustainable to have security act as a discrete function at the end of development, nor can developers do it all on their own. This has all put a strain on the relationship between security and DevOps teams. And this is something that you're going to see Patrick and I talk about quite a bit during this webinar. And I think, Patrick, that's a great lead in to the next topic.
Yeah, so I mean, we continue to see that divide between security, primarily a cultural divide, but a recent one-on-one study reported that roughly 2/3 of the AppSec professionals out there are indicating that it's hard to work, or they're saying that it's hard to work with development, and then 2/3 of development are saying the same thing about working with security. And if we dig into that a little bit further, we're actually seeing that, well, why is it hard? If you ask the AppSec folks, why is it hard to work with development teams? Again, it's a cultural aspect of, but they're saying, or they're believing that developers are publishing code with known vulnerabilities, and that they're really accepting or not defining risk the same way a security person would. It could be attributed to how security is approaching, right? Application security in the days of DevOps, but at the end of the day, it's just not really meshing. And then if you ask the development teams, if you dig into that a little bit more, really they say that the security folks, they don't understand, right? They're not measured on the same parallel, that they have to hit those deadlines, and if security is really not built in, they're going to push it out. that the security is really stifling their creativity and their ability to innovate. And really, it's something that has to be addressed and ultimately addressed as businesses continue to evolve. And I mean, they were already trending to make that digital transformation, and the pandemic just accelerated that, where traditional brick and mortar shops were having to go onto the web and meet the consumer through the through apps on phones and through the browser.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, I truly believe that developers aren't purposely or want their software to be insecure. There's just so much pressure that's put on these teams to deliver fast, and security has just always tended to be an obstacle. And that's an obstacle that just literally has to be removed. So let's look at, you want to?
All right, well, that brings us to our next little section here, which is called Key Issues Impeding AppSec from Being Integrated into the DevOps Process. Where are we going from here, guys?
Yeah, no, thanks, Mike. And it's one of the things that's it's really interesting, right? This is not all about technology. There's a lot of cultural aspects of this, people and process that tie into this divide or strain that's out there today. So we're just going to touch upon, we just did on that last slide at a very high level. So we'll go a little bit deeper into that, and then we'll look at some of the technical challenges organizations are having. So the first one is another result from that Ponemon report that came out at the end of 2020. And this one I find quite amazing. So the teams can't align on who owns security. 67% of AppSec pros say that their teams own security, but 39% of developers say that only 39% of developers say that security owns development. And you can ask, how is that the case? Well, because it's been so challenging, a lot of security teams tend to give some of that responsibility to the developers. And if you're handing off that responsibility to the developers, even though it's only a small portion, they may feel that they own it, right? If you're giving them responsibility, they feel like they own it. So I think, this is not a recipe for success, right? There has to be a clear owner, and the teams need to be able to work together to solve this problem.
And another bit is that like you said, Dan, that time to market, right? Essentially, teams are measured differently. Development's really the definition of success is hitting that deadline, getting the release out the door, where security is looking at risk or at the measurement from a risk perspective. What are the types of vulnerabilities in the application, or ultimately what's the risk profile of the business? So really aligning those goals and getting that shared measurement, those shared KPIs. So it's not just time to market, but how can security get incorporated into that measurement so it's a secure application to market.
Yep, agreed. Let's go on to the next. So the other one that is teams have a varied understanding of risk. And I think this is almost going along with something I mentioned on the first bullet here is if security teams are going to hand some responsibility to the developers, it's got to be consistent across the organization. I was just a couple of weeks ago, I was texting with one of my nephews who just graduated from university last year as a computer scientist. And computer scientist. He's in data analytics. He works for a data analytic company now. And I asked him a very simple question. I said, were you required to take security classes as part of getting your CS degree? And he responded, it seemed like he was taken back a little bit, but he responded by saying, no, there were some classes taken, but it just wasn't in my interest. I really wanted to focus on machine learning and data analytics and so forth. And I responded, back, okay, no, though, I get it. You were focused on your key goal for your degree. But it just is, to me, is really telling. With our reliance on all organizations now knowing that security is so important, it's amazing that universities aren't making that a requirement. But what that leaves you is you have all your development teams with very varied knowledge of what it means to be secure within their teams. And when looking at it from a holistic view for an organization, that's going to give you different varied levels across, and it's very difficult to manage and control when you don't have a full view into everything that's going on. So from there, yeah, I mean, it's a struggle for many organizations. Doctor, do you have anything to add to that?
That's an interesting concept you brought up with your nephew. It's essentially, at least at one point in time, I think it was only Carnegie Mellon that was offering AppSec as a major. So it really, like you said, it's not a core requirement to get your CS degree nowadays. It really isn't a primary major. I'm not aware of anybody that's doing a minor, so it's the same across the board. It's minimal experience coming out of schools, and requiring the security team or the AppSec team to cultivate that talent, to educate the development folks as they come on board, as they join these companies and start bringing products to market. So it's an additional paradigm, not just that they have to do it quickly and adjust how they approach security historically, but it's an educational aspect as well.
Yep. And with each team, what I was thinking, I went a little blank there in my mind, is with each team being so varied and different, it's challenging for the security teams to put in best practices and SLAs across the organization. And it just, again, gets difficult to give a full view into everything.
Yeah, just as you're saying, right? Every dev team or every pipeline's different, and the security teams need to address and essentially identify a template, right? A baseline of how they can integrate the various stages that they can incorporate security. Historically, right, coming in at the 11th hour and when the development team was following a waterfall approach and starting to adopt agile, that kind of was acceptable. But now that agile is mainstream and folks are moving to more of a CI/CD type DevOps type approach where releases are occurring daily, weekly at at least, you really have to look at and see, well, where is the opportunity that I can add security? Where can I co-op the processes that the development team's using, albeit customize it to each team, each pipeline and how they're working, but in a way that you're confident, or at least you have visibility into the security posture of what's going out the door. So when we start looking at adopting or adapting how security is approaching the development cycle, and we start talking about integrating and automating the scanning activities and your vuln discovery, it just adds an additional level of complexity. So not only do you have to do it faster in an environment that you don't have really any control over, right? It's the development team, it's the automation team that's responsible for the CI pipeline. You have to add in those bits, and which just creates additional complexity, having to maintain or manage those tool sets, making sure that the scans are happening and they're not falling over, and that you have resiliency and dependability in that process. It's just an additional hat that the security team's needing to wear now.
Yep, and then if we look at it from the DevOps aspect now, and now they're running security tools within their pipelines, someone has to make sense of the findings, right? So now you're running different tools across different stages. These tools generate a lot of data, and it, without specific security training, it's difficult to understand what is real and what is noise. And that's a really big challenge. I mean, not just for security teams, but if some of that onus is put on development teams, that's going to take a lot of time away from the work that they're supposed to be doing, developing features for their organization. So the ability to reduce that noise and the ability to correlate findings across tools is something that is very, very, very hard to do from a manual aspect with today's scanning tools that we see.
All right, guys, that brings us to our next section, which is how to break down these AppSec DevOps barriers that are out there. You guys have established a point, so bring us home.
Yeah, no, very good. So, I mean, basically, there's got to be a better way. That's what it comes down to. There's got to be a better way. With DevOps moving at such a rapid pace, and one thing we haven't mentioned at this point is security teams are extremely small, very, very small compared to DevOps. I think it's 1 to every 50 developer was up in the last BSIM report that came out. In order to do AppSec properly in today's environment, it has to be a shared responsibility. Now, with a shared responsibility, there still are some core aspects, and we broke it down into like 3 different pillars. The first one is, and it goes back to, there at least has to be an owner of security, right? Security teams have to be able to maintain enterprise standards across the organization. They have to be given the visibility across all these diverse development teams. But while they're doing this, they want to be able to set SLAs, set best practices. It goes into the second pillar is, and this is the one that put a lot of the strain on the relationship, is you can't slow down development. You've got to be allowed to let work within the developer's environment and enable that pipeline velocity that developers are looking for. And I even look at it, I mean, you either need to keep up the pace or actually help it improve. And you can say, how can you possibly help developers increase velocity within their pipelines? I think there is an easy way to look at this, and it goes down to our third pillar, and that's to unburden developers. Developers are asked to do a lot of the management of AppSec tools in the pipelines, which requires a lot of maintenance as tools continuously get upgraded. In some cases, developers are asked to make sense out of the scan findings and understand which things are meaningful and which things are not. If you can add security into the pipeline in a more automated fashion, take that burden off of the developers, you can actually allow the pipeline to continue to move at a quick pace and actually give developers more time to invest in it, which actually increases velocity. So the 3 pillars really that need to happen is you need to be able to maintain enterprise standards, keep the DevOps pipeline velocity moving, and take some of that responsibility away from the developers, but in a way that will know that their software is being protected. Patrick, anything on this slide before we move on to the next?
I mean, if you look at the evolution, right, and how DevOps came to be, it started off with breaking down the silos within the IT organization, right? Breaking down the silo between the team that defined and gathered the business requirements to the folks that are developing it, the folks that are QAing it, right? Breaking down those silos, putting the operations team into the development team and allowing them to go faster. You have to do the same thing with security. You have to break down that silo. These are the 3 primary focal points to help do that. But at the end of the day, if security is still peering in through the porthole or viewed as a bolted on event, it's just not going to happen. So you need to not only tie into the pipeline, but you need to make that happen faster. You need to increase velocity at the very least.
Absolutely agree.
So then this is essentially a poll that Snyk had published in their security report last year. And really, where do we start? How do we start building that security awareness? How do we start cultivating a security-minded culture on IT and with development? As Dan said before, right, it starts with a shared responsibility, having a dotted line within the development, the security, the operations team. And then I'm starting to see some security folks start adopting some practices, primarily agile, right? Start doing stand-up, start grabbing on or learning some of the ceremonies that the development teams are following to get code and product out the door. And then leverage those champions programs, security champions. So there's not a whole lot of security experts out there, or AppSec experts out there, and scaling out a program across all your different pipelines across the entire organization, you're going to have to develop that champion program, so that you can embed security into the development team, and at least have that way for the development team to raise their hand and say, hey, we're working on something, we're starting to touch PII data, we're working on a database that's going to handle credit card information. We don't have that experience. Can you help us out? So you're not coming in when the code's about to ship and you're scanning, or you're hitting that no-go button. You're getting part of the conversation when they're doing those design and architecture discussions, so that you can say, well, have you thought about this? Have we looked at that? Hey, that's going to be a compliance violation. We really can't do that. And then cross training. I haven't met a developer that isn't curious or looking to learn. It's just the approaches I've seen in the past aren't necessarily conducive to that type of creativity, that type of culture. So offering up some sort of lunch and learns or training programs that help gamify security and get that going. Like I've seen lanyards to do kind of like a belt program, like a martial arts class, right? And I mean, some other things that I've seen is obviously policy socialization. So defining the policies, letting them know where's that bar. But it all starts off with communication at the end of the day, right? Starting to break those walls down. It's just starting to converse and establishing that dialogue.
Yeah, no, so you mentioned two things that really caught my attention when you were going through there, Patrick. I love the idea of security adopting agile, right? You're starting to get them to learn some of the processes that developers go through on a day-to-day basis. And it goes on to my next one, where you were talking about security champions. We've seen some great benefits with embedding security champions within DevOps teams. Having someone that, like you said, that has that knowledge within those teams. Where that agile one made it really interesting is it's almost, I believe that for larger organizations, it could make just as much sense to embed a DevOps champion within the security team. Someone that understands their day-to-day process, not just the agile, but how they go about putting their pipelines together, know intimately all the different types of tools that their DevOps teams are using. Having that knowledge in the security team is absolutely make it better for when they come and sit at the table with DevOps and talk about how are they going to protect their apps. So if we want to call it DevOps champion or whatever, but it's the same concept, is really to have someone that has that knowledge on the other side. And when you mentioned that agile, that's exactly what I was thinking of when you were saying that. So I think that's great.
So I mean, when you're speaking the same language, a common language, it makes dialoguing so much easier. So much easier.
Yep, agreed. All right, cool. So how can technology help, right? I mean, a lot of, we'll admit, I mean, there's a lot of things that have to change within organizations for AppSec to get right. But technology, what it can do is it can be an enabler to get these teams working efficiently together. DevOps is all about automation, right? So, right when, what Patrick said as well earlier is adopt some of the practices that DevOps had by bringing security to the table, right? Well, DevOps is also about automation. And in order for security to play well in DevOps and work at the speed of DevOps, it has to truly and fully adopt automation into that program. This DOOR report is one of the most respected and looked at reports on the state of DevOps. And I find this red box here that I boxed out here very fascinating. Only 31% of the elite organizations, now these are like the top 5%ers that are doing DevOps extremely, extremely well. Only 31% have been able to automate security within their environments. And then obviously, as you go down from high, medium, to low, that's going to get much lower. And why is that? The real reason is a bunch of the things that Patrick and I have already discussed so far. So automation is going to be one enabler. We need to figure out how do we properly automate security within those pipelines so it's not slowing down the process.
And then once we figure that out, I mean, I think it's safe to say like static analysis and software composition analysis are starting to come essentially mainstream and familiar concepts, right? To talk about automation, and pen testing still definitely a necessity and a requirement, and automated testing doesn't replace that, but it helps augment or increase the velocity in which you can deliver secure code. But once you get that automated testing going, like how are you going to make sense of the results? Then we'll start looking at analytic reporting. How are you going to govern with that volume of data? And we need to make some sort of sense of it. We need to be able to ensure that the policies that are defined are actually being followed, right? If really the only way to like once a control is written, right, if there's not a test validating that the control is in place or that the control is being met, does it even exist? And if we're not using analytics to really make sense of the outputs of those tools, I mean, static analysis can be extremely noisy, and developers love that. But really driving that into action and insights is how we need to get after that.
Yep, and I think that's a great lead into here, and we probably can just pick out a couple of these. Where can we apply automation and analytics? And I think Patrick just touched upon some of them, right? So one is on pipeline integration, right? Automating the tools. Now, what has been so challenging about automating the tools is this concept that developers have been able to choose their own tools, right? So in large organizations, you could go across all the different teams, and each team is using different tools. So now you got to pick a SCA, a SaaS tool, a DAS tool, and try to integrate these into the pipelines. It gets really challenging when there's so many different pipelines that you're trying to integrate with. So it's, what could possibly help here is some standardization within organizations as well, but having a nice clean way to automate them, but also orchestrate them, right? Take that responsibility away from having for developers to actually understand how each tool works, because there are no standards on how to run a security tool, and they all do it in different ways. So to be able to take some of that and automate the orchestration of these tools is certainly going to be able to free up time for your security team or your developers, whoever has that responsibility for that task.
Yeah, and to add on that bit, just real quick,
Right.
I know we're on time, but when we start talking about how tools can be run, like there's a number of tools that really are catered for the power user, right? There's a bunch of knobs and buttons that you can hit, and if we're talking about a shared responsibility and providing some of that to development, how do you know that that tool was run correctly or run in a consistent fashion? Are you looking at a report from the first of the month and the 30th? What do you know that the tools are run safely or the same fashion, or do we see an increase in remediations because there's a bunch of false negatives? So automating those tools and making sure that they're run in a consistent fashion not only gives you that headway into ensuring that it's consistently being run every time code's running through the pipeline or products being released, but ultimately kind of tying it into the automation, the correlation, looking at the result sets in an automated fashion as well, and making sure that you're writing rules or that you're minimizing the noise where possible. So if you're looking at results and you're seeing that, well, I'm consistently suppressing this type of finding, or this tool is not really great for this particular aspect, let's try and essentially automate that process so that we're not redoing the same things over and over and over when it comes to triaging. And essentially when it comes to triaging, we have to optimize, right, where we can. We have to deliver those results. If the security team, if you have the luxury of looking at the results before development does, great, but we have to optimize that. That's very rarely going to happen. And when you give something to development, it has to be actionable. It has to be in what I call a sprints item or sprints unit worth of work. So that's kind of what my thoughts are there.
Yeah, no, and one of the things I was also thinking as you were going through that, when you enable that consistency and continuous nature, what you're also allowing, which is something that a lot of organizations struggle with, is the ability to scale AppSec within the enterprise. You know, a lot of organizations, they'll start with their rock star development team, and things seem so easy, right? Very easy to connect the tools, get things running, but that knowledge is only within that team. And when you try to bring it to others without having that consistency and standardized way of doing things, we typically see organizations start to fail with that process. And I think the third one here is really around the analytics. Well, one is shared services, right? You've got to be able to provide a service that everybody can collaborate on and work together on. But then being able to take the data, right? There's a lot of data that is generated from the AppSec tools, and to be able to store that into a central repository so that the security teams can get a holistic view of what's going on within the organization through reports is one thing, but then to be able to actually operate on that or do something on that to fix things. And what could that be? So you can look at it and maybe find the riskiest applications within your environment and really target those and go after and make a big impact and lower the risk for the company. You can find maybe similarities between different groups and organize training within your organization so that you can, again, start to educate the developers in areas that are affecting your environment, because every organization is going to be different. And then it's going to help you start to set better standards and best practices for your organization. All right, how are we doing for time? Okay, I think we're doing pretty good.
All right, well, that brings us to our final section, which is how to kickstart your AppSec program. Here we go, guys.
All right, thanks, Mike.
So, I mean, a couple of the foundational aspects, I mean, we've touched on it a couple of times, but starting to invoke that shared responsibility, so breaking down the barriers, and getting buy-in, not just at the peer-to-peer level, but from all stakeholders, from the executive down, and then at the individual contributor level, so that if there's an opportunity to share KPIs, share goals, right, when it comes down to your annual review or your quarterly review, let's see if some shared responsibilities there, so that security is getting measured from, or has at least some measurements from a development perspective, but then development has security goals and they're aligned. And then the achievability, right? We want to make sure those goals are obtainable and that we can measure and gather some momentum. But the bar doesn't have to be stagnant. We can continue to move that up or down. So once we've got that baseline, once we really have that visibility and that grasp on things, make sure that the goals are still achievable and reset if you have to, right? Because once you socialize a policy, it's not written in stone. You can change that up. You can say, well, hey, we thought we were going to go after criticals, highs, and mediums, but based on what we're seeing, based on the outputs and the data we have, maybe we should focus on criticals first, and then once we start gathering some headway, we can trail into highs and into mediums or compliance related aspects.
Just quickly, I mean, another DevOps concept that can be introduced is continuous improvement, right? You got to start somewhere. You've got to start to get some baselining and see where you're succeeding, see where you're not, and adjust as you go.
Exactly, right? And starting small, right? Start with an MVP, a minimal viable product, but start with a small team, right? So every organization is different. Even within your organization, every development team or every pipeline is different. So let's start with small, establish some sort of template. It doesn't have to be rigid, but what does success look like within your organization? Maybe you have a development or security-minded development team that's friendly and open and willing to be part of the experiment. And once you have that success, you can put that on the pedestal and you can use that to gather momentum across the various dev teams and within that the broader organization.
Exactly. All right, so the other one here, and this is a thought process I'm gonna kind of walk through it with you guys right now, is really lead with an AppSec platform. And what I want to do here is say, what is the goal and what am I trying to get at? Well, the goal is to gain the foundation to develop a mature AppSec program. Many organizations, and it's not saying it's wrong, you can be very successful with it, right? This is maybe a different way of looking at it. Many organizations are going to start by introducing tools. You know, maybe I'll start by introducing open source scanning. So I've got my SCA tool running within my environment. Then maybe I'll go and add a SaaS tool. And then you kind of build your program from there as you start to come up results. Another way that you possibly can do it, again, is to lead with an AppSec platform. And so what does that mean? So start with the platform first, and include and utilize open source tools to get started. Now, I am not saying open source better than commercial better than open source. They all have their advantages. If you're using commercial tools, start with your commercial tools as part of the platform. But what this allows you to do, it allows you to get that baseline and understanding of where you are as an organization. But you also start to put in the process in place right from the beginning that can be followed and copied across the organization. Then once you start to get that baseline, now you can start to see where your gaps are. And this obviously is where you can start to look at commercial tools that can be beneficial. You can actually test out the different commercial tools to see which one's going to have more of an impact for your organization. It gives you that central view. One of the things that so many organizations struggle with is visibility into what is going on across the organization. Starting with a platform and a central database where everything is located gives you that place to go to not just manage all the tools, but also get visibility across all the different findings and statistics across your org. Make vulnerabilities findings useful and operational for developers. One of those pillars that we talked about is unburdening the developers. One of the biggest pain points, we talked about it multiple times already, is making sense of that data. If you can take that responsibility away from your developers, and really developers want to work on code, they have a process, right? They want to work on code, they want to develop, and then they know they're going to fix, right? That's a common practice. Work on code, fix in defects and stuff. If you can have security work within that environment, meaning security shows up as a defect, that's going to keep them in their world and allow them to keep moving at the pace that they need to. Connecting your AppSec tools to your pipelines, right? This has to be in an automated fashion. Like I said it early in the conversation, is coming at the end of the process is just not doable today. And the way that DevOps is moving at an incredible pace, it has to be part of the process. It has to start early in coding. Earlier you find issues, the easier it is for your developers to fix things. So you want it as early as possible within your pipelines, and you want to run it during the pipelines because it's got to be continuous. Each check-in, each build, all of these things should be, security should be part of that process. And that's when you're going to gain ultimate success. And then you're going to be able to generate reports across your organization. One of the things we haven't talked about much is audit and compliance. Obviously AppSec is a big part of audit and compliance. A lot of times going through and when the auditors come in and you have to put all the details together, that's a extremely time-consuming task. So having the data in one place to be able to generate the reports you need is also going to be extremely valuable and time-saving for your organization. So a little bit of a different concept. I think multiple could work for your org, but something to consider. Anything on that, Patrick?
Yeah, I would say it's basically, this thought is more about a program rather than a particular activity. And when I've seen a healthy program, it's an indication of a healthy culture. People, process, technology, all three are going to come play together. Use technology to improve processes and automate what you can, because anything manual, I mean, it's human error. And when we're talking about releasing or automating the release process or the build process, anything manual is probably going to get skipped or overlooked. Not intentionally, it just happens. So if we talk about, right, defining a foundation, using essentially a platform to build your program on top of, the other aspects or the ancillary activities, they essentially become Lego blocks that you can pop in, pop out. It's kind of like how development or DevOps came to be, is essentially more the increase of use of open source libraries because they're Lego blocks. I've seen some developers talk about or describe that they're building less and just attaching more, and essentially taking that approach and spinning it from an AppSec perspective is a similar concept.
Yep. All right. Well, very good. So I think, Patrick, we're kind of at the end of the main part of our presentation. So what we're going to do now is just give you a brief overview of the ZeroNorth platform. So ZeroNorth has developed a platform to help organizations improve their application security by leveraging automation to create a centralized AppSec program that works seamlessly within your developer's environment. You know, when we talked about those three pillars early on, we've made those three pillars kind of the driving factor for our platform. We try to measure what we do against those three pillars. So looking at the diagram here, the first part I'll start off with is that automation and orchestration section. So ZeroNorth can integrate with both open source and commercial AppSec tools. We're a SaaS solution, so we already have a handful of open source tools that are available with the platform. Again, you can use that to set some baselines for your organization, or it may be very sufficient. And then we support the major commercial tools that are out there across all the different security types. The next point is we connect to the DevOps pipelines. Rather than have each and every tool connected to your pipeline and then have to manage those tools and ongoing management, and then basically learn how to work all those tools, you can connect your tools to ZeroNorth, and ZeroNorth will orchestrate those tools as part of those pipelines. That's going to remove that burden on those developers. As you run those pipelines, as the scanning tools run, we're going to ingest all of that data into our centralized repository. From there, we're going to go into our data refinement. This is where we're going to be able to normalize the data into a common risk framework. We're going to be able to compress and dedupe, remove the noise, remove the duplicates, and we're also going to be able to correlate across tools. What this is going to do is allow your developers to focus on the most meaningful things. We'll be able to prioritize those. And then what we do is we're able to open up tickets, remediation tickets in your developers' ticketing system, such as Jira. So developers really, security is part of the process, it's run, and they get tickets that tell them what needs to be fixed within their environments. Oop, wrong way. And then at the top here is all of that data is available through our dashboards. You can look at it from a security or CISO perspective, business perspective, looking at a holistic view across all of your application portfolios. You can go down to the application team so product owners can see how they're doing against their SLAs or their goals, OKRs that they have for their environments, all the way down to individual vulnerabilities. All of that data is available through the API. So if you want to integrate that within your BI or visualization tools that you use today within your organization. And we do all of this while providing the security teams that central management for their AppSec, for the AppSec program for the company, where you can start to put in best practices for your organization across the different application portfolios. So what we're trying to do is really enable AppSec at the speed of DevOps.
Yeah, and just to kind of quickly recap some of the benefits, right? At the end of the day, right, from a security perspective, we're helping drive or reduce the time to get that reporting, get that visualization, rather than spending a month pulling all the data together, and then once you get it, it's already lagged behind. It's no longer relevant. You're talking about hours, sometimes minutes, to get an idea of what's the current risk posture of an application, of my entire enterprise. And then from a development standpoint, as Dan talked about, that refinement, right? Making sure once we get the data in, that it's actionable, that we can provide it to the development team, using that compression, using that refinement to take that noise and generate units of work is going to help expedite, or at least get that culture of remediation going. And then, of course, at the business level, driving or delivering quality software and using security as an aspect of quality, right? We're seeing those kind of the headlines of recently, where no one really wants to be in that from a security perspective. So using quality and security synonymously to drive that and retain your customer base, using it as a differentiator. So those are some of the key benefits, but there's a number of folks that we work with from a customer base and the feedback we've gotten.
Yeah, if ROI is something that interests you, obviously reach out. We'd be happy to work with you. It's really dependent on each organization and where the benefits are for you. I think with that, that ends our presentation. So definitely want to say thanks everybody for listening. We'd love to answer or address any questions that have come through.
All right. Well, that was great, guys. We have at least a couple of questions in here. The first one is, this looks to somebody like it's a SEM for app security. Is that fair? Is that correct? Do you think that guy is a good characterization, or how do you compare this to what people know about existing security platforms?
I think that's a fair analogy. I've heard the SOAR for AppSec used as well, but the idea is to make sense of the data and take action on it and automate those events. So I think that's a pretty good description.
All right. And then our next question goes all the way back to slide 8. So you guys may want to follow along there, but the question is penetration testing has been put in the stage for deploy to production. Can we consider deploy to production to be roughly the equivalent of a pre-production environment? And can we consider tests at protocol levels as well, such as OAuth, et cetera?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to think that deploy to production, that the development team is using a pre-prod environment, like a QA or UAT environment. So doing your testing there. That's not to say you don't do your testing in your production environment. You want to make sure, I mean, development and IT, they strive to mirror those environments as closely as they can, but you still want to do production safety tests to ensure that they are the same, or that you don't have any low-hanging fruit out there.
All right. Dan, I'm going to send this one your way. We talk a lot about, making sure that security doesn't get in the way of the developers, and we talked about culture. Do you think that there's also an issue where the security people don't necessarily trust the developers because sometimes they think they're the root cause of the original problem? And, how do I kind of get to that kumbaya moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that almost was one of the highest answers to the Ponemon question that Patrick showed at the beginning is they believe developers purposely put it, avoid doing security and don't care about security. I actually believe that's not true. I mean, I absolutely do not. I mean, I think they're just measured differently, and until we get to a place where the goals for both the security teams and the development teams are aligned, we're going to continue to have that cultural divide between the two. You got to get them working in the same direction, right? So I think Patrick summarized it really good during the presentation. Is these OKRs, not the developers are going to have OKRs. It's going to be, some of them are going to be based off of number of releases and meeting deadlines and all these things. But there also needs to be an OKR that they're measured against that says, we're keeping, no critical vulnerabilities, or we're reducing the number of vulnerabilities over time. And developers should also be, security teams should also be measured by, the way that they work with the DevOps teams and helping them meet deadlines, right? Put speed, put different things in there. So it's really getting them to be measured together, alignment in the measurements, and getting them to work together is what's gonna really solve this problem.
All right. If everybody's measured on the same thing, they'll suddenly come together, huh?
It's a start.
A lot of things in this world, right? One of the other things is, when you guys were showing the Poneman slide, I think it said basically half of people weren't doing anything in terms of education in this DevSecOps kind of thing. Are there any tips that you guys have for best practices to get started? How do I get people going down the road?
Pizza? No, I'm not kidding.
Right. Lunch and learns, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of different ways to bring people together. Now, obviously, it's a little bit harder during COVID times, but we laugh about it. Pizza, lunch and learns, different things. It's get people in the room and start the education process. I think, and I think it's been hard because teams are so diverse, and it's, the knowledge is so different across those different teams. It's what do you educate on, right? Is what you're educating on for one team may not be beneficial to another. You got your web team, your database team, and there's different things there. So trying to find a common ground or knowledge for the different teams, understanding where the deficiencies are for teams is going to help you put in training and different things in place that's going to be meaningful for them. Sorry, Patrick, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I liked your pizza so much.
No, that's exactly it. I think ways I've seen kind of people evolve that concept is like Uber Eats or some sort of like gift card to get the folks to hop on a webinar or Zoom, something to that effect, so that you can still take that concept and apply it in the world we live in today. I think that's one that I've seen success. Another one, it's a little bit difficult now that we're in the pandemic, but like just going out to lunch, like starting off with just social activities to start building some sort of dialogue, some sort of friendship. It doesn't necessarily have to be business related. It doesn't need to be security focused, but once you start socializing and figuring out, well, how do these teams work? What is these teams essentially measured by? You can start sharing some empathy or some appreciation for how those teams are functioning, and that's one way to start breaking down that barrier and start that socialization.
All right, empathy goes a long way. One of the things you did mention was this notion of gamification. I'm not sure everybody's familiar with the term, but what exactly are some examples of gamification that you guys have seen that might work or that people could employ? It may be a generational thing, but maybe, certain people take to that more so than others. So, walk people through it.
Gamification. So basically kind of like levels where you set thresholds for various activities. If you go through so many e-learning courses, or your team has hit a certain remediation rate, or using defect density as a measurement, essentially defining how you're going to measure and define those thresholds. And then the gamifying part is using like the kind of like your martial art kind of program, right? Like different belt colors or lanyards or gift cards, right?
Yeah.
If there's a prize at the end of the rainbow, then folks are gonna go for the ride.
It's almost like leveling up. Going to the next level. There could be prizes at every level, but.
All right, so what I got out of this so far, guys, is the key to this is food, empathy, metrics, and games. Any last part of any last
technology that can also help in being an enabler.
All right, cool. All right, guys. Hey, I want to thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise today. I want to call out our winners. Our winners for the gift cards are Andrea B, Ed F, Jackie W, and Laura N. I know I learned a lot here today. And folks, we wish you best of luck in your future DevSecOps adventures. See you all next time.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mike. Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks, folks. Bye.
Thanks, everybody, for joining.